Hi, welcome to Chapter 3, Prenatal Development and Birth. In this chapter, we're going to look at conception, genetics, chromosomal disorders, pregnancy and prenatal development, problems with prenatal development, and birth in the neonate. I'm trying to make these a little bit shorter, so I'm not going to read all these objectives to you. But this is going to be a very long PowerPoint with all these objectives. Hopefully not. Conception and genetics. Let me put my glasses on. The first step in the development of an individual human being happens at conception, when a sperm fertilizes an ovum, an egg cell. Sounds like one of your sex education classes from high school, huh? The sperm moves from the vagina through the cervix and the uterus, finally meeting the ovum in the fallopian tube. The process of meiosis can be explained to help students. Actually, what this process of meiosis, what you'll do is you have what's called 23 single unpaired chromosomes. And there's actually 30,000 genes on the 23 chromosomal pairs. So at conception, the combination of genes from the father in the sperm and the mother in the ovum creates a unique genetic blueprint, the genotype, that characterizes the individual. The phenotype is comprised of an individual's actual characteristics. The simplest set of genetic rules is the dominant recessive pattern, in which a single dominant gene strongly influences phenotype. So chromosomes are strings of genetic material in the nuclei of cells. There are actually 22 pairs of what's called autosomes that contain most of the genetic material for the new individual. The 23rd pair are called sex chromosomes. They are XY for males and XX for females. Chromosomal differences: half of the male sperm contain X chromosomes, half of the sperm contain Y chromosomes. So in other words, what determines if the infant is male or female is whether it's a sperm containing X chromosomes or it's fertilized by sperm containing Y chromosomes. This is kind of a little known thought. They say that X chromosome sperms are slower than Y chromosome. So therefore, if you want to have a boy, I think that's a wives' tale. We'll just skip that part. But androgens and SRY gene signals body to secrete hormones called androgens, causing male genitals or gonads to develop. Now, congenital adrenal hyperplasia occurs if androgens are present in a female body due to a mother's medications or disorders, and the baby may form a male-appearing external genitalia. That's called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. There's a nice little video here of some cultures discriminate and have a preference for sons. Okay, twins are an interesting thing with conception. Fraternal twins come from two eggs that are fertilized by two separate sperm. So you have two ovums fertilized by two different sperm. That's how you can have a male and a female twin. Identical twins result when there's one ovum that was fertilized by one sperm, and then the ovum separates into two parts, creating two identical individuals, genetically identical. Assisted reproductive techniques are available to couples who have trouble conceiving. At conception, the combination of genes from the father in the sperm and the mother in the ovum creates a unique genetic blueprint, the genotype, that characterizes the individual. The phenotype is comprised of an individual's actual characteristics. Now, the simplest set of genetic rules is the dominant recessive pattern, and we talked about that already. Now, your textbook notes an increase in multiple births over the past 30 years. Why has that occurred? For one, more women over 35 are giving birth for the first time. Number two, women over 35 are more likely to have difficulty becoming pregnant, and thus they are being treated with fertility enhancing drugs. So they're more likely to deliver multiple offspring. So on one hand, every parent is going to encourage their child to please finish school, start a career before you have children. But biologically, the older you wait, the more possibility of genetic complications. So you got to find that sweet spot between, waiting till you finish school and not waiting too long to where there's biological issues with pregnancy. But it's also an issue if you have a child too early, where you're more likely to have a premature baby. Conception genetics. First of all, at conception, the combination of genes, we actually talked about this already, but the genotype provides what's called the genetic blueprint. And the phenotype is comprised of an individual's actual characteristics. Okay, so the simplest set of genetic rules is dominant recessive pattern, in which a single dominant gene strongly influences a phenotype. So there's a dominant recessive pattern. The dominant genes always express their characteristics. The recessive genes come in pairs to express their characteristic. For instance, if my child is bald, I guess that would be a dominant pattern. Or if I have the recessive gene for that, and my wife has a recessive gene for that, my child will probably have the same male pattern baldness. Polygenic inheritance is many genes blend together to increase genetic outcomes seen in the phenotype. We love twins with genetic research because what it does is it compares identical and fraternal twins. They've been used for many decades to examine the role of heredity in human development. Now, identical twins are more similar than fraternal twins in measures of emotionality, activity, sociability, and intelligence. That's from Bouchard, 1981. What are some other factors to consider? Environment. These correlations that researchers have found are less than +1. If you look at their blood type of identical twins, it's going to be +1. There's a definite correlation because they're of the same DNA. But when you look at emotionality, activity, sociability, and intelligence, it's not identical, even for identical twins who grew up in the same home. There's strong evidence that physical traits are clearly influenced by heredity. This might not be true for psychological traits. So other factors to consider would be environment. So taking a critical look, fraternal twins are no more genetically similar than non-twin siblings. Yet the IQs of fraternal twins are more strongly correlated than those of non-twin brothers and sisters. What explanation can you think to explain this difference? So non-twin siblings would be having pretty much the same experience of environment. So probably that's where there's a stronger correlation of IQ. So the term environment is extremely broad. What are some variables that comprise an environment? Could be parenting, parents' education level, similar schools, similar life experiences. Whose hair do you have? On the next slide, you'll see genetics of hair type, and see if you can answer the question. There's a nice little video on dominant recessive traits that explains how these genes are passed on. So take a look at figure 3.1, and it shows examples of how genes for curly and straight hair pass from parents to children. And you can also go to table 3.1 on page 51 to review genetic sources, which is right here. And there's what's called dominant genes. These are things that you only receive if one of the parents has dominant genes for these things. Recessive genes, you only get this if each parent carries a recessive gene for one of these characteristics. Now, polygenic is a pattern of inheritance that many genes influence in the phenotype. For instance, skin color, 3 genes may blend dark and light colored genes together. Eye color, variations offer multiple color possibilities. And height, multiple genes work together to determine a child's height. Genomic imprinting. A defective gene will have one effect if inherited from the mother, and different effect if the gene is inherited from the father. Chromosome 15 causes what's called Prader-Willi syndrome when inherited from the mother, and causes Angel syndrome when it's inherited from the father. There's also something called mitochondrial inheritance, and these are genes in the mitochondria, which are actually introduced through the fluid surrounding the nucleus of the ovum before fertilization. It becomes a source of several serious disorders, from Levi and Mary in 2011. Okay, multifactorial inheritance. And this is inheritance affected by genes and the environment. Rudder et al. Will come up with 5 general principles that genetics and environment integrates to influence development. Principle 1, individual differences are in reactivity to the environment. 2, two-way interplay between humans and environment. 3, human-environment interplay, considered an ecological framework. 4, people process experiences rather than just serving as passive recipients. And 5, people act on their environment to shape and select their experiences. Okay, now let's take a look at some autosomal disorders. And these are caused, some are caused by the recessive genes, like PKU, sickle cell anemia, or Tay-Sachs disease. Disorders caused by dominant genes would be like Huntington's disorder. Autosomal disorders would be like PKU, caused by lack of ability to metabolize a protein. Sickle cell anemia, the defect creates sickle cell shaped red blood cells, offers protection against malaria. Tay-Sachs causes death by age 3. Huntington disease is a deterioration of the ventricles of the brain. So one of the 22 pairs of autosomes are involved in sex determination, okay? And that would be that sex gene. Autosomal recessive is 2 copies of this abnormal gene must be present for the disease to develop. And autosomal dominant disorder, the abnormal gene from one parent is sufficient to inherit the disease. So we have what's called the dominant disorders, the recessive disorders, and the sex-linked recessive disorder. So these would be the autosomal are your first 22 pairs of chromosomes, and this would be from that 23rd pair of chromosomes. And this kind of shows how if the parent has a dominant gene, and this would be for a sex-linked transmission, like hemophilia. If the mom's a carrier of hemophilia, she will most likely pass it to her daughter. And if his son gets it, he'll most likely be like a carrier. So if he marries someone else, he could pass that on if it's a dominant trait. Now, sex-linked disorders are caused by the recessive gene on the X chromosome. Boys suffer more often than girls with sex-linked recessive disorders. Let's go back to the next one here. Trisomies is where you have 3 chromosomes rather than the usual pair. So instead of having the XX chromosome or the XY, trisomy 21 results in what's called the Down syndrome. 1 in 800 infants have Down syndrome. Results are mental retardation, distinct facial features, physical abnormalities. Maternal age is a major factor. The older you are, the higher the odds of having a child with Down syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome is where boys have underdeveloped testes, very low sperm count, language and learning problems, and breast development. Turner syndrome is anatomically, the baby is anatomically female, but they have slow, stunted growth, heart problems, poor cognitive skills. And then XXX gene is 1 in 1,000. This is where they may develop slowly, poor verbal skills, low intelligence. They tend to do poorly in school. The XYY is 1 in 1,000. They tend to be taller than the average boys, large teeth, and they're developmentally normal in other measures, including intelligence and aggression. You know, a lot of times people like to think in black and white that, you know, either you are male or female. Even when you look at chromosomes, even nature sometimes creates differences where you know you might be born with both genetics or the genitalia of both male and female, and we'll talk about some of the problems or issues that have come with that. Next is the fetal development of the baby. First of all, when the egg and sperm meet, it's called a blastocyst or a zygote, and it implants into the lining of the uterus. A chemical, HCG, is released in the urine that can help diagnose pregnancy. That's why when you pee on a stick, you can find out if you're pregnant or not. The cervix thickens and secretes mucus, serving as a barrier and protecting the baby from bacteria. Prenatal care is critical because all the baby's organs are developing during those first 8 weeks of pregnancy. So if you think you're pregnant, it's very important to pay attention to your diet, to avoid taking in chemicals that could really harm the development of the baby. Some problems here we talked about are ectopic pregnancy. That's when instead of attaching to the cell wall, the zygote actually attaches to the fallopian tube. Okay, from week 1 to week 2, the cell becomes 4, and then the zygote drifts down the fallopian tube. By day 12, it buries itself in the lining of the uterus. Hormones are released to stop the woman's menstrual cycle. A blastocyst is 60 to 100 cells that begin to specialize into different developmental support parts. The specialization of cells is needed to support development. So we have what's called the placenta, which is like it provides the food and the water. The umbilical cord provides the food and water. The placenta is like the whole unit. Then there's the yolk sac and the amnion. Problems, we talked about ectopic pregnancy and spontaneous abortion. About 15% of the pregnancies end in what's called early miscarriage, where the body does not accept the embryo and releases the embryo. There's a few videos that are pretty good to watch. Now, to watch these videos, you have to go open the PowerPoint itself and then click the link, and then you can watch these videos. Next is the embryonic stage, and this is 2 to 8 weeks after conception. The neural tube becomes the brain and spinal cord. Heart and kidneys develop during week 3. During week 5, arms and legs develop. Week 6, brainwave activity starts. Week 7, the penis develops, if it's a male. Skeletal system bones begin to develop. Eyelids seal shut to protect developing eyes. Week 8, the liver and spleen begin to function. Digestive and urinary systems are functioning. And here's another video of the embryo developing inside the womb. Okay, the second trimester, you might start showing that you're pregnant. There's some weight gain, there's some fetal movements, you might feel the baby kick, and increased appetite. It's very important that there's monthly doctor visits, that this is where you might have an ultrasound and listen to the heartbeat of the baby. Some problems at this time are gestational diabetes, RH incompatibility, increased blood pressure, miscarriage, premature labor. From week 12 to week 24, there's weight gain, uterus expands, the risk of miscarriage drops at this point. So at this point, the body has adjusted to the fetus. Fetus grows rapidly. Sex can be determined after about week 13. So you can look and see by ultrasound if it's a boy or a girl. Fetal movement is felt between week 16 and 18. This is when you start feeling the baby kick. At end of week 8 until birth, this is what's called the fetal stage. A lot of growth happens here. Organ systems grow to become functional during this period, especially the brain and the lungs. At week 25, the fetus will be able to recognize its own mother's voice. Week 24 is what's called the age of viability. That means the baby, if it was born premature, would have a chance of living outside the womb. Then all the organs are in place and the baby can live outside. From week 37 onward, that's considered full term. At any time there would be a good time for the baby to come. Okay, so care during this third trimester would be weekly visits to the doctor, ultrasound to assess position, pelvic exam to check cervical dilation. Problems at this time would be increased blood pressure, bleeding, bladder infection, premature labor. There might be some additional weight gain and abdominal enlargement during this time. And the structure of a single developed neuron. Their cell bodies are first to be developed primarily between weeks 12 and 24. Axons and dendrites develop later, especially during the final 12 weeks, and continue to increase in size. This is significant because this is a critical period. Any smoking or drugs or even prescription medication could really affect this development of their neural net. Okay, here's a cute little picture of a baby yawning. It appears between the 10th and 15th week. Its present signals beginning of sleep stages, so the baby's learning to sleep. Usually it'll sleep while you're walking around, you're kind of rocking them to sleep. And then when you're sleeping, that's when they're probably moving around and kicking and stuff like that. Glial cells develop during the last few months of prenatal development. They hold neurons together and give form and structure to the fetal brain. Males form what's called a hormone called testosterone, which is produced during weeks 4 through 8, which helps with activity level as well as sexual organ development. Differences in physical development and coordination persist, with females remaining more advanced until adolescence. Now, prenatal hormones are linked to what's called cross-gendered variations, which can affect spatial ability, physical aggression, communication development, and skeletal development. For prenatal issues, males are more often spontaneously aborted. Males are more sensitive to mother's marijuana use. Males, let's see, there's differences in physical development and coordination persists, with females remaining more advanced. Let's see. Let's talk about ultrasound imaging helps to identify new information about fetal behavior. Fetal response to sounds and vibrations are seen by changes in the heart rate, head turns, and body movements. They appear as early as week 25. Fetuses can differentiate between familiar and novel stimuli by week 32 or 33. Fetal learning is evidenced by the remembering of familiar rhymes. So if you tell your child a Dr. Seuss story, the mother's heartbeat and the odor of amniotic fluid, the fetal will be able to notice some of these things. They'll recognize stories, they'll recognize mom or dad's voice, even smells. And now we're going to talk about problems in prenatal development. Okay, few things we're going to look at is what's called duration and intensity of exposure, timing of the exposure. First and 8 weeks are the most dangerous, and the greatest damage is during organ systems' most rapid development. Teratogens are basically chemicals that can affect the baby's development. So key with timing here, teratogens have the most impact during embryonic and early fetal phases of prenatal development. For instance, rubella exposure during the first 4 weeks may cause deafness, cataracts, heart defects. HIV can pass through the placenta or pass to the baby during a vaginal birth if the baby's exposed to the blood, the mom's blood. 1/4 of exposed infants become infected. If the moms are taking AZT, that lowers the risk factor. Weaknesses in the immune system can lead to complications from other illnesses. Now, other sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis, herpes, gonorrhea, cytomegalovirus, these are things that can be passed on to your child. So these are different teratogens that can affect your child during their development. And here's a little video about different teratogens. Now, inhalants create problems similar to fetal alcohol syndrome. Accutane, if you ever, it's usually a drug to help you from what's that called? To reduce acne. It dries out your skin, causes severe facial, ear, or heart deformities. I remember when I took Accutane, there was all kinds of warnings. Streptomycin causes deafness. If you're taking penicillin, it can cause skin disorders like tetracycline, can cause tooth deformities. Diet pills can create low birth plate. So don't take diet pills while you're pregnant. It's very bad. Okay. Smoking is correlated with lower birth weight, about 1/2 pound lighter. Higher rates of learning problems, antisocial behavior, and ADHD are connected with smoking during pregnancy. So if you want your kid to be, really wild and crazy, no, I don't suggest that. Drinking causes children are generally smaller. They have facial changes, short, small heads, mild to severe mental retardation, and perceptual difficulties. For marijuana, that's the most frequently abused drugs by parents. Create tremors and sleep problems. Infants show little interest in their surroundings for up to 2 weeks. Heroin can cause a miscarriage, premature labor, early death, drug addiction. Babies have high-pitched cries and suffer withdrawal. So you can imagine a baby being born and already being addicted to heroin and experiencing withdrawal. Cocaine, research results are ambiguous due to the complex interaction between the drug and other teratogens to which the baby might be exposed. But in other words, don't do it. It's very bad. Diet is very important. If you have a folic acid deficiency, it's associated with narrow tube defects such as spina bifida. Malnutrition in the final 3 months is associated with low birth weight, even mental illness in adulthood. It affects the developing nervous system, brain stunting, the weight and volume of the brain are reduced. So nutrition is very, very important. Now, first pregnancies are occurring later. The average age is now 25 years of age. And by waiting, you have a higher risk for pregnancy. But also teenage mothers have a higher risk during and after birth too. Some of the risks for women who are over 35 is what's called a low-lying placenta, premature birth. Teenage mothers have higher risks. The biggest risk is they suffer, more likely to suffer from poverty, and they may not have had proper prenatal care with doctor visits and nutrition avoiding things that are bad for them. Children may exhibit learning and behavior problems in school as a result. There's a nice little video here on teen pregnancies. Depression leads to premature labor. Depressed mothers have difficulty with attachment issues to their own child. Fetal maternal medicine helps to manage this effects of long-term illness, including heart problems and diabetes. Prevention would involve monitoring mother and fetus for most illnesses. Now, environmental hazards have a big effect on the baby. For instance, mercury. If you'd want to avoid consumption of contaminated fish or too much fish, because a lot of fish will, they're like little mercury magnets. Lead is found in paint and pipes, in lead crystal. You don't want to expose your baby to lead. It's very common, especially in older homes. Children have a higher count of lead in their blood. Arsenic comes from pressure-treated lumber. Dental offices and outpatient surgery could be places in which pregnant women could be exposed to harmful gases. And severely distressed mothers may produce fetuses who grow slowly, are premature, or are underweight. Social support and counseling may help. There's mixed information from research on this. Here's a little video that talks about the effects of stress on fetal development. And fetal assessment and treatment, there's what's called the ultrasonography, chorionic villus sampling, amniocentesis is where they take a sample of the what's that called, the amniotic fluid inside the womb. The alpha fetoprotein blood test and fetoscopy. That's a big words here. And chorionic villus sampling, placental cells are extracted through a hollow needle inserted into the mother's abdomen. These cells can be used in a variety of laboratory analyses to determine whether the fetus is healthy. In amniocentesis, a similar technique is used to extract cells from the fluid that surrounds the fetus. These cells are used to create a chromosomal map that can help physicians identify several kinds of birth defects. Now, with the advent of antiretroviral drugs, the rate of mother-to-fetus transmission has been greatly reduced. Do these findings justify mandatory testing and treatment of pregnant women who are at high risk of having HIV or AIDS? Here are some other things to consider is what are some ethical issues that come to mind, knowing that if in advance if a child has some sort of chromosomal disease or dysfunction, what are the choices that people make? I've heard people told by their doctors that say your child is not perfect, you want to have an abortion, and they choose later to have the baby and the baby was fine. So I guess there's some danger in some of these testing and looking at some of the information, but on the other hand, it's good for parents to know what is the health of their child developing in the womb. It's also important to know if there's anything they can do in advance to prepare that child for good health. So things to consider when you're going to have a child is where do you want to have the birth? Most people choose to have the birth in the hospital. Some people choose to have it at home it's with a midwife. Also, some hospitals have what's called birthing rooms, which feel less like a hospital. They try to make it feel more like just a little more homey. Birth attendants are certified nurses or midwives that would take a place of a doctor if you're having it at home. Think of it, before those hospitals, everybody had their child at home. However, because of the medical care that we have, there's a lot less complications during pregnancy, or if there is, they have the right tools and expertise to deal with it. Natural childbirth is a common thing that many people do. It's called the Lamaze method. That's one of them. And instead of having drugs delivered to the mom during labor and delivery, they learn breathing techniques to help them cope with the pain. And then with Lamaze classes, the husband and wife work together in walking through the process. And then there's a little video here about drug-free deliveries. Do you want to make a birth plan? How would you plan the ideal birth for yourself, for a partner or a friend? Check the link below to develop your own birth plan. There's a little link to interactively set it up. For the physical process of birth, you have what's called contractions, and then the dilation of the cervix. In other words, the cervix is opening up to the point where the baby can pass through. Contractions are where the muscles are pushing the baby through that cervix to the birth canal. Stage 2 is the actual delivery of the baby. Stage 3 is the delivery of the placenta and the umbilical cord. So it's not over with the baby being born. There's still the delivery of the placenta and the umbilical cord that all comes out. And there's a nice little video here about the birth and the newborn. So these are videos that show the 3 stages of labor. And here's where the head starts to crown, the head emerges, and then the final stage where the placenta and everything else comes out. Well, not everything, placenta and the rest of the fluid. Next is cesarean deliveries. Why are cesarean deliveries performed? Sometimes they find there will be a heart monitor in a baby, and the baby might be going through what's called fetal distress. It might be because the umbilical cord is wrapped around the baby's neck. It could be just something going on with the fetus where they will say, you know what, we're going to do a cesarean. Sometimes the baby is what's called breech birth, which means instead of coming out head first, they're coming out feet first or butt first. Unfortunately, that's how I came out. I'm sorry for my mom being breech birth. Next is birth size. Sometimes the baby might be huge, and so they might choose a cesarean. Poor progress during labor or complications during labor. Sometimes the mother's health and age concerns might lead to a cesarean C-section for birth. Now, after the baby's born, there's what's called the APGAR scale. What they do is they do what's called neonatal assessment. This is kind of a neat little video on the NICU and premature birth. But the first month, they'll do what's called the Brazelton Neonatal Behavior Assessment. And it tracks development over 2 weeks, and they look at responses to stimuli and reflexes are checked. What they'll look at is heartbeat, respiration, muscle tone, reflexive response, and color of lips, palms, soles, and feet. They also look at live birth weight, which should, if it's below 5.5 pounds, that's not good. Preterm, mostly born before week 38, would be considered a preemie baby. Risks have to do with respiratory distress syndrome. Intervention could be adequate parental education and support to reduce the risk of complications. Here's a reflection. How could the research on singing? They found out the use of music by NICU staff and parents support the development of preterm infants. It's an active area of research and an emerging field of music therapy. What they found out is preterm infants who were sung to ate more and gained weight faster. They were discharged from the hospital earlier. They had higher oxygen saturation levels and a stronger infant-parent emotional bond. So how could this research on singing to preemies be put into practice in neonatal intensive care units in non-disruptive ways? If you're responsible for helping parents of newborns understand the value of singing to their babies, how would you explain the relevant research to them? Finally, assessing the neonatal. Do preemie babies catch up to everyone else? Development is assessed on an individual's basis. 2/3 to 3/4 of preterm infants catch up by school entrance. The lowest birth weight and earlier gestational stage are associated with long-term developmental delays. So 2/3 to 3/4 of premature infants catch up to their peers by the time they go to school. So it's best to adopt a wait-and-see attitude toward your child's development before attempting to influence it in order to avoid pushing a child beyond his or her limits. So key is keep a positive attitude and do everything you can. And eventually the child will catch up. Well, this concludes our presentation. Have a great week.